The curtain ripped open with a sharp whoosh, and I froze, shirt half-buttoned, heart slamming against my ribs. His ice storm gray, flecked with mischief, locked onto mine, and in that split second, the world outside the cramped fitting room dissolved. I didn't know his name yet, but I knew I'd never forget that moment. My name is Jamie Torres, a 24-year-old art student scraping by in Seattle, where the rain never stops and dreams feel like they're always one bus ride out of reach. I'd wandered into Second Thread, a quirky thrift store in Capitol Hill, looking for something to wear to my first gallery showcase. My paintings swirling, chaotic abstracts were finally getting their moment, and I wanted to look like I belonged, not like the kid who grew up in a rundown duplex in Tacoma, sharing a mattress with my little brother. The store smelled of old leather and lavender, racks stuffed with vintage jackets and mismatched flannels. I was drowning in self-doubt, holding up a faded denim shirt, when it happened. He stood there, one hand on the curtain, a crooked grin spreading across his face. "Dude, you look like you're about to rob a bank in that," he said, his voice low and teasing, like we were already friends. I blinked, caught off guard, my cheeks burning. He was tall, maybe 6 feet 2 inches, with a mess of dark hair and a sleeve of tattoos peeking out from his rolled-up flannel. A guitar pick hung on a chain around his neck, glinting under the fluorescent lights. I stammered something incoherent, clutching the shirt like a lifeline. "I'm Ethan," he said, leaning against the fitting room frame, completely unbothered by the fact that he'd just invaded my space. "And you're lost in there, huh?" He nodded at the pile of clothes I'd dragged in, a chaotic mix of sizes and styles I had no business trying to pull off. I laughed, despite myself, and mumbled my name. Ethan's grin widened, and something in his gazia sparked. A challenge made my stomach flip. I didn't know it then, but that moment was the start of everything. Seattle's Capitol Hill buzzed outside, a kaleidoscope of pride flags, street musicians, and coffee shops packed with people arguing about politics or poetry. I'd always loved this neighborhood, its energy, its unapologetic weirdness. But I'd never felt like I fit in. Not really. I was the quiet kid, the one who hid behind sketchbooks and secondhand hoodies, too scared to admit who I was, even to myself. Growing up, I'd heard enough whispers of me dad's slurs, my mom's nervous glancesto keep my truth locked tight. I wasn't out. Not officially. I wasn't sure I ever would be. Ethan, though, was different. He moved through the world like he owned it, like every step was a chord in a song only he could hear. He grabbed a leather jacket from a nearby rack and tossed it at me. "Try this. It's got your vibe." I caught it, the worn leather soft under my fingers, and raised an eyebrow. "My vibe?" I asked, skeptical. He just smirked. "Yeah, tortured artist with a secret. I'm good at reading people." We spent the next hour in that store, bantering like we'd known each other forever. He told me he was a musician, played gigs at dive bars across the city, and had a band called Midnight Static that was one viral video away from making it. I told him about my showcase, how I was terrified of standing in a room full of strangers judging my work. He listened, really listened, his eyes softening in a way that made me feel seen for the first time in years. By the time we left Second Thread, the sky was bruising purple, and I was wearing the leather jacket. Ethan walked me to my bus stop, his hands stuffed in his pockets, his breath visible in the chilly air. "You're gonna kill it at that showcase, Jamie," he said, his voice steady, like he believed it more than I did. "And when you do, I'm taking you out to celebrate. Deal?" I nodded, my heart doing that stupid flip again. Deal. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the way he'd looked at me. The way his laugh felt like a melody I wanted to memorize. I sketched him in my notebook, his sharp jawline, the curve of his smile, the ink on his arm that I hadn't gotten a good look at yet. I didn't know what was happening to me, but it felt like a door I'd kept locked was creaking open, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to step through. The next day, I was back in my tiny apartment, paint stains on my jeans, trying to finish a piece for the showcase. My roommate, Lila, a fiercely optimistic barista with pink hair, noticed my distraction. "Spill," she said, plopping onto the couch with a mug of tea. I hesitated, then told her about Ethan. Her eyes lit up. "Oh, honey, you're in trouble," she teased. "Sounds like you've got it bad." I brushed it off, but she wasn't wrong. Ethan was a storm, and I was already caught in it. The showcase was a week away, and I threw myself into my work, but Ethan kept creeping into my thoughts. I saw him again at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill, purely by chance, or so I thought. He was sitting at a corner table, strumming a guitar, his bandmates laughing over a notebook of lyrics. When he saw me, he waved me over like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You stalking me, Torres?" he teased, but his eyes were warm, and he slid over to make room for me. We talked for hours that day, about everything and nothing, his dreams of playing Coachella, my fear of never being good enough, the way Seattle's rain made everything feel like a fresh start. He told me he'd grown up in a small town in Oregon, where being openly bisexual meant dodging fists and Bible verses. "Took me a while to figure out who I was," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "But once I did, I stopped hiding. Life's too short, you know." His words hit me like a punch. I wanted to tell him I wasn't there yet, that I was still figuring it out, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I just nodded, and he didn't push. He never did. That was the thing about Ethan, made you feel safe, even when you were terrified. By the time the showcase rolled around, I was a mess of nerves and hope. I'd invited Ethan, half expecting him to flake, but he showed up, guitar pick necklace and all, looking like he belonged in a magazine. The gallery was packed, a mix of hipsters, art students, and collectors sipping cheap wine. My paintings hung on the walls, raw and exposed, like pieces of my soul pinned up for judgment. Ethan stood by my side, his presence steadying me as strangers murmured about my work. "You're brilliant," he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. "Don't let anyone tell you different." I don't know how I made it through that night, but I did. And when it was over, Ethan kept his promise. He took me to a dive bar with sticky floors and a jukebox that only played 80s hits. We drank cheap beer, laughed too loud, and danced to a Springsteen song like no one was watching. When he pulled me close, his hand on my waist, I didn't pull away. For the first time, I didn't want to. The bar's neon lights buzzed overhead, casting a warm glow over Ethan's face as he leaned closer, his hand still on my waist. I could feel the heat of him, the rhythm of the music pulsing through us. And for a moment, I let myself forget the weight of the world. But fear has a way of sneaking back in. And when the song ended, I stepped back, my heart pounding with something I wasn't ready to name. Ethan didn't push. He just grinned, grabbed my hand, and led me outside into the Seattle night. The air was sharp, the kind of cold that bites at your fingertips, but his hand was warm, grounding me. "You okay, Jamie?" he asked, his voice soft but searching. I nodded, but I wasn't sure I was. I'd spent so long building walls, keeping people out, that letting someone, and even someone like Ethan, felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. We walked through Capitol Hill, passing murals of rainbow flags and street vendors selling tamales from carts. Ethan talked about his band's next gig, a show at a tiny venue called The Comet. "You should come," he said, his eyes bright. "I'll dedicate a song to you. Something cheesy, like Journey." I laughed, but the idea of him singing for me, in front of a crowd, made my chest ache in a way I didn't understand. Over the next few weeks, Ethan became a constant in my life. We'd meet at coffee shops, thrift stores, or the pier, where we'd watch ferries cut through the gray water of Puget Sound. He'd tell me stories about his life, how he'd left Oregon after a fight with his dad, how music saved him when nothing else could. I told him about my family, how my parents never understood my art, how I'd always felt like I was hiding a piece of myself. He listened, his eyes steady, and for the first time, I felt like someone saw all of me, even the parts one was afraid to show. But it wasn't all easy. I was still wrestling with myself, with the word I hadn't said out loud. Gay. It felt like a stone in my throat, heavy and unmovable. I'd grown up hearing it as an insult, a weapon, and even in a city as open as Seattle, I couldn't shake the fear that saying it would change everything. Ethan, though, was patient. He never asked me to label myself, never pushed me to be anything I wasn't ready for. But every time he smiled at me, every time his hand brushed mine, I felt that door in my chest creaking open a little wider. One night, we ended up at his apartment, a cramped studio above a record store in Fremont. The walls were covered in band posters, and a guitar leaned against a sagging couch. He played me a song he'd written, his fingers moving over the strings with a kind of grace that made my heart stutter. The lyrics were raw, about longing and freedom, and when he finished, he looked at me, his eyes soft. "That one's for you," he said, and I swear I forgot how to breathe. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was the music. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, but I leaned forward and kissed him. It was clumsy, hesitant, my hands shaking as they found his shoulders. But then he kissed me back, and it was like the world cracked open, spilling light into all the places I'd kept dark. When we pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine, his breath uneven. "Took you long enough," he whispered, and we both laughed, the sound shaky but real. After that, everything changed. We were inseparable, stealing moments between my classes and his gigs. I'd sit in the front row at the Comet, watching him pour his soul into every chord, his voice rough and beautiful. He'd come to my studio, sprawled on the floor with a sketchbook, teasing me about my paint-stained hands. It was easy, natural, like we'd been orbiting each other our whole lives and finally collided. But the world doesn't let you stay in that bubble forever. My parents called one afternoon, their voices tight with expectation. They wanted me to come home for Thanksgiving, to catch up and meet someone nice. The way my mom said it, her tone heavy with hope, made my stomach twist. They didn't know about Ethan, didn't know I was falling in love with a man who made me feel like I could finally be myself. I hadn't told them because I wasn't sure I could handle their disappointment, their judgment. Ethan, of course, saw right through me. We were at a diner, splitting a plate of fries, when I mentioned the call. He leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "You're not out to them, are you?" he asked, not accusing, just curious. I shook my head, staring at the table. He reached across, his hand covering mine. "You don't have to tell them until you're ready, Jamie. But you don't have to hide who you are, either. Not with me." I wanted to believe him, wanted to be as brave as he was. But fear is a stubborn thing, and mine had roots that ran deep. Thanksgiving loomed like a storm cloud, and I couldn't shake the dread. I hadn't told Ethan I was going home to Tacoma, hadn't told him how much I was dreading facing my parents. But he knew something was off. We were at his gig at the Comet, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the hum of conversation, when he pulled me aside after his set. "What's eating you, Torres?" he asked, his voice cutting through the noise. I shrugged, but his eyes held mine, patient and unyielding, until I mumbled something about family drama. He didn't push, just squeezed my shoulder and said, "I'm here when you're ready to talk." The drive to Tacoma felt like a funeral procession. My parents' house hadn't changed, same sagging porch, same faded curtains, same tension hanging in the air. My mom hugged me too tight, her smile brittle, while my dad barely looked up from the football game on TV. Dinner was a minefield of small talk, their questions about my art and my plans laced with expectation. Then my mom dropped the bomb. We invited Maria from church. "She's a nice girl, Jamie. You two would get along." My stomach dropped. I mumbled something about being busy with school, but the weight of their hopes pressed down on me, suffocating. I didn't tell them about Ethan. I couldn't. Not when my dad's voice still echoed in my head, calling my cousin a disgrace when he came out years ago. Not when my mom's eyes flickered with worry every time I mentioned Seattle's liberal scene. So I sat there, picking at my plate, feeling like a coward. When I got back to Seattle, Ethan was waiting at my apartment, sprawled on the couch with Lila, who was painting her nails electric blue. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, sitting up. I tried to laugh it off, but he wasn't having it. He pulled me outside, onto the fire escape, where the city sprawled below us, all lights and noise. "Talk to me," he said, his voice soft but firm. And I did. I told him about my parents, about the weight of their expectations, about the fear that kept me silent. He listened, his hand resting on my knee, and when I finished, he didn't say anything for a long moment. "You're not a coward, Jamie," he said finally, his voice steady. "You're figuring it out. That's brave as hell." Then he pulled me into a hug, and I let myself fall apart, just a little, in the safety of his arms. The next few months were a blur of love and fear, intertwined like threads in one of my paintings. Ethan's band was gaining traction, their songs popping up on local radio, and I was getting commissions for my art, small but steady. We were building something together, a life that felt real and fragile and impossibly beautiful. But the closer we got, the more I felt the shadow of my secret looming over me. I hadn't told my parents, hadn't told most of my friends. Lila knew. Of course, figured it out the second she saw us together, but the rest of the world was still in the dark. One night, Ethan's band played a bigger venue, a club downtown packed with sweaty bodies and screaming fans. I was in the crowd, my heart swelling as he sang, his voice raw and electric. After the show, he found me, his face flushed with adrenaline, and kissed me right there in front of everyone. For a moment, I didn't care who saw. But then I noticed a familiar face in the crowd, my cousin, Miguel, the one my dad had called a disgrace. He was watching, his expression unreadable, and panic clawed at my chest. Miguel didn't say anything, just nodded and disappeared into the crowd. But the next day, I got a text from him, "Saw you last night. You okay?" I didn't know how to respond. Was I okay? I was in love, happier than I'd ever been, but I was also terrified of what it meant to be seen. Ethan noticed my mood. Of course, they always did. We were at the pier, sharing a bag of fries, when he asked, "You gonna tell me what's got you so quiet?" I told him about Miguel, about the fear that my family would find out before I was ready. He took my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my skin. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. "But you also don't have to do it until you're ready." His words stayed with me, but so did the fear. It was like a splinter, small but impossible to ignore. I started pulling away, just a little canceling plans, making excuses. Ethan didn't call me out on it, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. The way his smile didn't quite reach them anymore. I hated myself for it, but I didn't know how to stop. The distance between us grew like a crack in a windshield, slow but unstoppable. I'd see Ethan's texts, "Miss you. Torres. You good?" And I'd stare at them for hours, unable to respond. I was drowning in my own head, caught between the life I wanted with him and the life I'd been taught to want. Every time I thought about telling my parents, I saw my dad's face, heard my mom's voice cracking with disappointment. I wasn't ready to lose them, but I was starting to lose Ethan. It came to a head one rainy night in March. Ethan showed up at my apartment, soaked to the bone, his hair plastered to his forehead. "We need to talk," he said, his voice tight. I let him in, my heart pounding. Lila was out, the apartment quiet except for the patter of rain against the windows. He didn't sit down, just stood there, his hands in his pockets, his eyes searching mine. "What's going on, Jamie? You're pulling away, and I don't know why." I tried to brush it off, but he wasn't having it. "Don't do that," he said, his voice breaking. "Don't shut me out. If you don't want thesis, just say it. But don't leave me guessing." His words cut deeper than I expected, because I did want this, more than anything. But I was terrified, and I told him so. I told him about the fear that choked me every time I thought about coming out, about the family I wasn't ready to lose, about the part of me that still felt like I didn't deserve this kind of happiness. Ethan listened, his face softening, but there was pain there, too. "I get it," he said quietly. "I've been there. But I can't keep waiting for you to decide if you're in this. Jamie, I love you, but I can't be your secret forever." He left after that, the door clicking shut behind him, and I stood there, feeling like I'd just lost the best thing in my life. For the next week, I was a ghost. I went to class, painted, ate, slept, but it was like moving through fog. Lila tried to pull me out of it, dragging me to coffee shops and art galleries, but nothing worked. I missed Ethan's laugh, his warmth, the way he made me feel like I could be myself. But I didn't know how to fix it, didn't know how to be brave enough to deserve him. Then I got a call from Miguel. He'd heard about my friend from a mutual cousin, and the gossip was spreading. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said, his voice gentle. "But if you're hiding who you are, it's gonna eat you alive. Trust me, I know." He told me about his own coming out, how it cost him his relationship with my dad, but gave him a life he could actually live. "You're not alone, Jamie," he said. "And you don't have to be." His words lit a spark in me. I didn't want to lose Ethan, didn't want to keep hiding. So I made a plan. I invited Ethan to my next art show, a small exhibition at a community center in Capitol Hill. I spent days working on a new piece, a canvas that poured out everything I'd been holding back, swirling colors, bold and unapologetic, with two figures at the center, their hands intertwined. It was us, me and Ethan, and it was the most honest thing I'd ever painted. The night of the show, I was a wreck, pacing the community center as people milled around, sipping wine and murmuring about my work. Ethan showed up, looking hesitant, his guitar pick necklace catching the light. I took a deep breath and led him to the painting. "This is for you," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm done hiding. I love you, and I want everyone to know it." His eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought he might walk away. But then he smiled, that same crooked grin from the thrift store, and pulled me into a kiss. The room faded away, And for the first time, I didn't care who was watching. The kiss in the community center felt like a beginning, not an end. Ethan's arms around me. The murmurs of the crowd fading into status. It was the first time I'd let myself be seen. Really seen. And it was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. When we pulled apart, his eyes were bright, and he whispered, "You're braver than you think, Torres." But bravery isn't a switch you flip. It's a muscle, one you have to keep working. After the show, I knew I couldn't keep avoiding my family. Ethan offered to come with me to Tacoma, but I needed to do this alone. So I drove back, my stomach in knots, the painting of us tucked in the back seat like a talisman. My parents were in the living room when I arrived, the TV blaring some cop drama. I didn't waste time. I sat them down, my hands shaking, and told them everything about Ethan, about who I was, about the life I wanted to live. My mom cried, her hands twisting in her lap. My dad didn't say a word, just stared at the floor like it held all the answers. It wasn't the blowout fight I'd feared, but it wasn't acceptance either. "We need time," my mom said finally, her voice thick. My dad just nodded. I left feeling raw, but lighter, like I'd finally set down a weight I'd been carrying for years. Back in Seattle, Ethan was waiting. We didn't talk about my parents right away. Instead, we went back to the Comet, where his band was playing a sold-out show. I stood in the crowd, watching him pour his heart into every note. And I realized something. Love isn't just about the big moments, the dramatic confessions, or the grand gestures. It's about the quiet ones. The way he'd wait for me to be ready. The way he'd make me laugh when I felt like falling apart. The way he believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. Over the next year, we built a life together. I got a small studio space, started selling my art online, and Ethan's band landed a record deal. We moved into a tiny apartment in Fremont, with a view of the Space Needle on clear days. My parents didn't come around right away, but they started calling, asking about my art, about Ethan. It was slow, messy progress, but it was progress. One night, we went back to Second Thread, the thrift store where it all began. The same lavender smell hung in the air, the racks still stuffed with mismatched treasures. Ethan grabbed a hideous Hawaiian shirt and held it up, grinning. "This is your vibe now, right?" he teased. I laughed, pulling him into the fitting room, the curtains swishing shut behind us. We kissed, the world outside fading away, and I knew, no matter what came next, we'd face it together. Looking back, I think about that moment when Ethan pulled back the curtain, when he saw me, I saw me and didn't look away. It wasn't just about falling in love. It was about finding the courage to be myself, to live a life that was mine, not someone else's. And in that cramped fitting room, under the fluorescent lights, I found something I didn't even know I was looking for, a future.